The title of the exhibition is Black and Blue, and it took me, all of 30 seconds to get to that title from the beginning. And I was thinking about this idea of being after something or being in liminal space, imagining what it felt like to be squeezed into something or what it felt like to be living after a blunt force trauma of some sort. This show explores this theme of bruising. It explores, using, the Louis Armstrong song as a reference point, Black and Blue, the idea of how certain sensibilities and certain activations of tragedy are certain opportunities that are born of complicated circumstances, how they evolve and change, and how we get an opportunity to take ownership of those circumstances and to kind of unpack them and explore them and to give them different voices and different agency. These paintings in particular for me were incredibly meditative. These were really quiet in a way and really gave me space to think about being lyrical and being present and exploring more than reacting. Theoretically, you can almost read these as one color and its activity going from its darkest position to its most transparent. This is kind of like a single song in that respect. I have one large painting that I'm calling Seascape, which has several gestures or forms that begin to kind of demarcate kind of a boat-like vehicle. That painting in particular doesn't know where it wants to go. It's kind of free. Of course, there's this potential reference to escape, which has always been present in my work, or the idea of a vehicle that could be employed to escape or to get somewhere. But there's also kind of a whimsy in those works, and they don't necessarily have to be tied to a crisis-like situation. They can be what sailing often is, which is going where the wind is willing to take you. The sculptures are made up of 3 different materials, one being clay, which I use to help form the molds. The second being oyster shells, which are covering different aspects of that clay. And the third being copies of Louis Armstrong's album, Black and Blue, which are often cut in half and then are used to pierce the structures of the sculpture. The 3 materials come together to create what I imagine to be the story of how these sculptures function. The Zora Neale Hurston text, Colored Me, has been something that's followed me for many years. And at one point she says, "I'm not tragically colored. I am too busy sharpening my oyster knife." It's something that I think is so loaded and so complicated and so engaging and gives so much space for different kinds of storytelling. And so my employment of certain kinds of signifiers, oyster shells in this case specifically, speak to that kind of complicated grouping of thoughts and an ambition to have a sense of self that goes beyond the centralizing of white supremacy in my narrative. One of the things that's been most interesting for me about clay is that I was told several years ago that clay has memory. I think about that relationship to it physically and how it will potentially remember or hold me accountable to that. Bronze, of course, is the most familiar material in the lexicon of art history and sculpture. So when I'm working towards something that's going to then be cast in bronze, I really try to stay in the space of what it is when I'm using it, and then just get excited about what the result will be as it evolves into this next stage where it feels like it gets to participate in some larger conversation of art historical relevance and material transition. I always been really interested in this kind of hybrid space between the potential for organization and then an ambition to really expand outside of some of those formal constraints, being that grid and then the kind of more haphazard or more gestural or more painterly or more performative acts of mark making and gesture that you see as the line cascades past some of its more formal challenges. My interest was more in lines that could change direction and could determine different aspects of their goal throughout the process of being born, meaning that they could take a left, they could take a right, they could be insecure, they could be unpacked to explore other themes, that they were just kind of evolving and changing and finding their own way. Every film that I've ever made was an act of love. In this film in particular, I was interested in banality and the mundane and the simple. This film really pushes back at me in every way. In some respect, it's a self-portrait. In others, it's opening a door that has previously been very scary for me to imagine and explore.
Very good.
Boredom becomes a status quo position, becomes one of agency and one of incredible action. The question I think we often have to ask ourselves is, why does this film still seem so anxious when nothing happens? I like the opportunity for some ambiguity. I feel like I've always left healthy sized breadcrumbs that can lead you through the project and give you access to antecedent thoughts that help you understand how it is I'm framing the opportunity for you to explore or to trace back to my thinking. One of the things about being an artist as a whole is that your individual experience should not be the only way in which an artwork or a theme can be understood. There has to be space for folks to come in and participate and be able to see themselves in their own experiences. There's what my goals are to share, and then what I think lives underneath.